In this video, I asked the question, what is the cost of human life in India? That's a deeply disturbing question, and it goes into areas of ethics, morality, human dignity, everything, because how can you ever think of putting a cost on a human life? Because just think of it, life is beyond value, beyond estimate, beyond price, inestimable. A life taken away or a life lost is something that cannot be compensated. That is the truth. And therefore, this question has been raised with some trepidation, a lot of unease that this question has ever posed. For every man, every person is born with rights, inalienable, and those rights include not only the right to live, but the right to live with dignity. Everyone on earth. This is the concept of human rights. Against this background, I must now bring you to a few instances where we have to give some idea, or as a matter of public judgment, on the value of life. I refer to the first incident which made me think of this very disturbing title. What is the cost of a human life? The cost of tomatoes, we know. We can speak of that. The cost of bread, we can speak of that. The cost of building a house, we can speak of that. But the cost of a human life, that is a terrible question. But that question occurred in this context. Unfortunately, this is a context that is a continuing context in this country. On June 27, that is just about 2 weeks ago, a little more than 2 weeks ago, a woman with her mother drove up to a temple in Sivaganga district near Madurai. She asked the temporary guard at the temple, security guard at the temple, Ajit Kumar, 27 years of age. She asked him to park the car, and so he did. She wanted some help with a wheelchair for her mother. The two was done. After she was done with her temple visit, she complained that 9.5 sovereigns of gold ornaments or something, which was in the car, was now missing. After a few hours, and that is inexplicable, but doesn't matter. Let's get on with the incident. She phoned up a high IAS official holding some position. And the IAS official set in motion the police, I won't say proceedings, police action. He seems to have called up the superintendent of police of the district and given him this task of finding out. And the superintendent of police, DSP as they call it, gave instructions to a special team with these words: I want the valuables to be recovered at any cost. At any cost. These were the words. Now, all of this is not of my making. It is more or less a verbatim version of what was reported in the Frontline, a prominent and well-known magazine of the Hindu group. The policeman under the specialist who specializes in bringing out the truth, took the hapless young man into custody and beat him up and subjected him to third-party methods, not in the police station, but away from the police station. He was subjected to such torture that he was crying and wailing all the time. And the picture of the torture was captured by a temple employee. That was the evidence. So he was asked, he and his team were asked by their chief to recover 9.5 sovereigns of gold, which I reckon as about 10 lakhs, considering the prices at about 80,000 or thereabouts per sovereign. For 10 lakhs, that's the cost. They killed the young man in cold blood. Now that question makes me ask, if the value of the life of this young man and the value of life of every Indian was 10 crores, and it is known not only to the police but to everyone else, would this trade-off be happening so easily that you try to recover a 10 lakhs worth of jewelry and you extinguish the life of a person who is valued at 10 crores? This is a terrible question, as I said. I should not be asking about the value of life because it will not be 10 crores, 20 crores. Irrespective of his circumstance, it is inestimable. That is the value of life. But would this trade-off happen if everyone, each one of us, our life is valued at a minimum of 10 crores? It set me thinking. And the Frontline report said that the Madurai bench of the High Court, which committee which went into the injuries on Ajit Kumar, as presented by the surgeon, etc., were constrained to observe that even a common criminal would never have inflicted this type of injury. 33 injuries, or external injuries, on his body and internal bleeding. 33 injuries. The frontline report says that there was a resemblance between this case and the infamous case of the torture of George Floyd in 2020 in Minneapolis in the USA. Now, remember, that too went to some kind of a tribunal. And the fact that George Floyd was a troublemaker in his neighborhood, was prone to drugs, use of drugs, and the police were called in because the supermarket person felt that he was trying to pass off a counterfeit $25 bill. And what they did was they knelt on they took him and knelt on his neck for as long as 9 minutes. And he was saying all the time that he was suffocating, that I cannot breathe. The same thing happened to Ajit Kumar, who said until the last that he had not stolen. Now, this was the resemblance. I bring this into account because the Minneapolis case went to out-of-court settlement because the relatives had given a case of manslaughter. In the out-of-court settlement, who was presiding, they did not even for a moment think about his past. Not at all about his past. A life had been extinguished, never mind his past. And they gave an award or a compensation, that is the correct word, a compensation of 216 crores, that's in rupee terms, 216 crores. That was the settlement. The point that I say is this: the economic circumstances or whatever of the victim of the dead person is not relevant at all in deciding what value of a life that has been extinguished forever. He will not see the next morning. He will not see his parents. His parents, he will not see all his friends, no one. So, there are some recent events, though not one of this kind of cold-blooded murder by the police and therefore the state. On July 3, D. Bindu went to the Kottayam Medical College Hospital with her daughter seeking medical help for an important case, a serious case of spinal surgery, possible surgery. The building collapsed and Bindu was trapped under the debris. It took hours for the equipment and the earth mover to come in because there was no way. The construction was such that none of these machines had coming in was ever thought of. She died. And she never saw the next morning. She never saw her children. She never saw her husband. This is standard protocol, it seems, that the minister or someone in charge, it's all over the place, all over the country. This is the way it is done in a hush-hush operation. They go to the victim's relative's place, the house, early in the morning. By the time they're getting up, express their condolence and announce what is called ex gratia. Ex gratia, a Latin phrase, payment. This is everywhere. So these things I take up because the July 3 D Bindu death is fresh. It happened just about 40 or 50 kilometers from here. The Kottayam Medical College Hospital. That's why the details are all within, because all the papers reported it. But there are things happening every day, every week throughout the year. So they announce an ex gratia payment. As far as I know, they valued D Bindu's life at 10 lakhs rupees, the cost of her life. I am not going to explain this too much because this is terrible, 10 lakhs. She will not see her children. She will not see her grandchildren. She will not see anybody. A life has been extinguished forever. She will never see that again. On July 8th, 3 school children in Semankuppam in Kadalur district were killed because their van, school van, went through an unmanned gate, and probably the watchman was sleeping, and the train ran over them. 3 school children. This is all the reason. July 9th, the Vadodara bridge in Gujarat collapsed, and about 20 persons died. So throughout the year, things happen. People die. And the protocol is the same. Ex gratia payment. That means payment made out of grace. Out of grace, as a favor. Out of favor, we're giving you this. This is the stage. I am only referring to these 4 incidents. Now it is time to realize the enormity of this thing and see that as a further hurt into the dignity of these people who died, to call it an ex gratia payment, and to offer some kind of a job for somebody, and so on. This is a terrible thing that adds to the hurt. And of course, the opposition groups say 10 lakhs, make it 20 lakhs. This kind of business goes on. At the bottom of all this is that the life that has gone has no way that it can be replaced, that it is of inestimable value. So what do I suggest? Just as we have the various accident tribunals, motor car tribunals and so on, I am not a one-man institution researching this thing, but it struck me that this has to come not as gratis, not as some kind of ex gratia, but it has to come by law. They are entitled to the compensation because of the negligence or the lack of safety requirements by the state. So I would suggest that the government, members of parliament, all of them should think of making this thing, these laws of life, come under the Human Rights Commission, which can have a separate wing. I do not for a moment want all this thing to go into adversarial jurisdictions where lawyers fight with each other and where the overclogged machinery of the courts are further burdened. Because as the saying goes, a young man goes for litigation and finally the judgment comes by the time he is into his grave. This is the situation in India. But I would like to think that these people have rights, human rights, right to dignity too, and not that they should be measured in terms of some kind of calculation based on their economic circumstance. Just imagine that George Floyd case, his past and all that was totally irrelevant. It was the life lost that was focused. So here too, I would think that the Human Rights Commission should have a wing which will take this thing immediately into account. If they are already overburdened, and I do not know how it is, there should be a separate wing for these kinds of things, where the compensation has to be decreed within about 30 to 45 days from the incident. That way, those who depend on the people, those who are dependent on those who were killed, will have some relief. I conclude by saying that I still have a lot of unease and trepidation that I could ever even think of the cost of a human life. For I do believe that poor or rich, farmer or industrialist, daily worker or some industrial magnate, life is equal. And that is the basic principle of the Human Rights Declaration. Therefore, I would only plead that our government and our policy makers should think of this thing in that way. Meanwhile, nothing prevents the progressive governments of Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Gujarat, and Telangana to start on this principle that a life lost this way, the collapse of a building, the collapse of a bridge, the children being run over because the interlocking system was not put in place. There are 300 stations still. Why? Because there is a trade-off between the cost of human lives and the cost of making these changes. There are bureaucrats who do this trade-off. But once you value these, all lives valued at a minimum of 10 crores. If that is put into practice, and there is nothing preventing these progressive governments to start with this, no matter whether legislation comes putting this whole thing under National Human Rights Commission or otherwise, this will be the template for all the governments of the state and the center to follow.